QuickBooks Online 2025 keyboard shortcuts. Get ready and some coffee because we're learning how to save time with QuickBooks Online 2025. Here we are online in our browser searching for that QuickBooks Online test drive, the free sample company file available to everybody, looking for the result that has Intuit.com in the URL because Intuit is the owner of QuickBooks. We're going to be selecting the United States version of the software, verifying that we are not a robot. Continue. I'm going to close that prior tab because it's no longer needed. Then we're going to be in the sample company file, Craig's Design and Landscaping Services. Let's open the major financial statement reports as we do every time. The reports, you know where they're at. They're on the left-hand side. We're in the standards, favorites. Right-click it on the balance sheet to open that link in a new tab. Right-click in the P&L to open the link in the new tab as well. Let's go to that tab to the middle, close up that ham boogie, and change the range. 010124 tab 123125, selecting the drop down to see it in years, running to refresh it. The years of 24, 25 are side by side. Let's tab to the side to the right and close up the hamburger and do it again. Otra vez, another time. 010124 tab 123125. I think I got that right. And select the drop down to run it to years and then run it to refresh it. And noting that we only have that 5399 in the 2025 column at this time because we refreshed the screen and therefore we don't even have the prior presentation transactions, which I recommend you do as well, possibly also opening in incognito window so it doesn't bring in the cookies. Let's go to this first tab. And in prior presentations, we've been working and following through the different types of forms in the plus button. These are the things that we'll typically be doing on a day-to-day process, and therefore they're pretty easy to find, the navigation of the system being pretty well laid out. However, if we can get keyboard shortcuts for certain things, that'll make things possibly easier. That'll possibly save us some time. So here are a list of the keyboard shortcuts, one of them being to find this dialog box. So all of these shortcuts basically have Control-Alt, and then you can select the shortcut. This one we're looking at here is the question mark. So if you want to find that page, you go to Control-Alt and then question mark, and this is going to give us the information for your company ID and so on if you need that information, if you're communicating with Intuit about your account, for example. And then you've got your shortcuts here. So just a quick look at these. You can experiment with them yourself. Like I say, personally, I think the navigation of the system is pretty well laid out. So using the mouse is fairly efficient. But anytime you use the shortcut, it could be a little bit faster to do things with keystrokes. And of course, keystrokes and shortcuts are impressive to other people. And we all know that that's important in an office space. You got to impress people with your keyboard shortcut knowledge. So in any case, we have the normal forms, the invoices, the checks, the estimate, the expense form, and so on and so forth. Now, these are pretty readily available over here in the plus item, which is here. And it's also, if you close the hamburger, it's going to be up top. So you could find them fairly quickly, but if you're going into an invoice all the time or any of these in particular forms, the shortcut might be worth learning. In other words, if you're in like the accounts receivable department and you spend a whole lot of time making invoices, then obviously it might behoove you, it might be worth your time to learn the invoice shortcut. Whereas if you're not using the invoice all the time, you probably don't really need it. So that's how I would see these forms. If you make journal entries all the time, maybe you want to learn basically that shortcut. We have the expense, receive payment, journal entry, customers. So this one I think could be useful because the customer field is a little bit buried. That's over here in the sales item. So anything when you're going to that backup detail, so that you can communicate with customers. If you're in, for example, the accounts receivable side of things, then you might be talking to customers about trying to collect on their receivables, and it might be a nice shortcut to go to the default to the customers. Run payroll, Vendors, similarly with the vendor side of things, I think this might be one of the more useful shortcuts. And then the chart of accounts. Chart of accounts is kind of buried, so that could be a useful one. Lists, that might be useful if you like the lists drop down. The help menu, possibly one of the most important ones for just everyone in general. You can shortcut to the help, although it's up here, you have the help item, but that might be useful. The global search can be a useful one. We'll check that out. And then focus on the left, and this is the dialog box. And then we have the exit transaction view. So that might be a little bit easier than hitting the X button up top, or just a little bit more fancy to do. But again, it's probably not saving that much time. Similarly, cancel out will do much the same things. Oftentimes, it might have different uses in some specific areas. And then save and new. So when you want it, when you're in the form, you can go save and new, save and close, save and send, and then the print. So let's just take a look at a couple of these. So like I say, I think one of the more important ones, let's do the global search. So if I go out, I say Control Alt F, we get the global search. This is neat because it gives you the recent transactions. So if you entered something and you find out, hey, look, something got messed up, or I can't remember what I did recently, then this is useful because you can go into the recent transactions here and try to piece together what has happened. So oftentimes if you do data input, for example, and you jump over to the financial statements and you're like, dude, I don't know what happened. Something changed in a way I didn't expect it to change. That's when you might want to go into that recent transaction history and see what is happening. Also, if you're supervising someone, or if you're in an instructor role and you're teaching someone, you might use that to see what they've done recently for the recent transactions, to see how they possibly messed something up. And then, so we have the invoice, so Control Alt I is an invoice form. So that of course will open the form. Like I say, I think most of the forms are pretty readily available in the plus button, but it might be useful sometimes to learn the shortcut to your most popular forms. Otherwise, you go into the plus button, you find your invoice form. If you have the hamburger closed, you still have the plus button typically over here where you can typically find the form. So it's generally, most of the forms are really available in that way. I'm going to open the hamburger back up. Similarly with the check, the estimate, the expense, the receipt payment, the journal entry. Now the customer view, like I say, it might be a way to go because the customer view, you will recall, if I say Control Alt C, takes me to the customers. Notice that one I think is more useful because this is a little bit buried. In other words, if you're in the dashboard and you constantly deal with customers, what do you have to do to get there? You've got to go into the sales area and then choose the customer tab. So it's 2 clicks away, basically. Notice that you could also bookmark them. Again, I tend not to use the bookmarks that much because one, I think it's pretty well navigatable to find everything. And two, if I customize everything out with the bookmarks, I can't communicate with other people as they use QuickBooks, right? Because they're not going to have my bookmarks. So I used to do that with things like Excel, for example, which I think has a lot more complexity in it, and having the shortcuts are quite useful in some places. But again, if you forget where the actual location is, you can't really communicate as well to other people. So I prefer to try to see where everything is laid out. I do, however, think the shortcuts would be great if they can save you a little bit of time to get to this location. So that might be a useful one. It can save you a couple clicks if you're going into this one. Similarly, with the vendor side of things, that would be Control Alt V. So Control Alt V, boom. That's going to take us into the vendors. So again, if you were outside on the dashboard and you're on the payable side of things and you deal with accounts payable, you're communicating with the vendors, you normally have to go to the expenses and then to the vendors. So Control Alt V would save you, in essence, 2 clicks to get there. What else do we've got? Run payroll, vendors, chart of accounts might be useful. Chart of accounts is in a few different locations, and this is one that QuickBooks changes a lot. It's under the cog is one location. You could go under lists here, and that's going to be one of the major lists, the chart of accounts. You can also find it over here in not the sales, it's in the transactions tab now. And then they put it into the chart of accounts. So it's kind of one of those underlying ones. So there's not like a perfect place to put that one. So that's where they currently have it. So that might save you some time if you're on the dashboard and you want to look for the chart of accounts. Control-Alt-A, chart of accounts, boom. So that could be a useful one possibly if you're going in there a lot. The lists, these are all the lists. Now the lists is a term that's kind of brought over from the desktop version, which used to be laid out with like drop downs in a similar fashion as the old Microsoft Office programs were that had all the drop downs. So that, I think that's where they got this idea of the lists. Now the lists are basically usually the kind of the behind the scenes things, the major two lists being the chart of accounts and the products and services. But you also have these other items which they're grouping under the category of lists. So again, if you want the chart of accounts, you're probably going to search possibly for the chart of accounts, and the products and services is the other big list that you go into all the time, which you can also find in the sales tab and in the products and services. But it might be a little bit easier if you memorize the lists to use the shortcut. So that's going to be a Control-Alt-L. So let's go do that, Control-Alt-L. And that brings us into our lists. It gives us our chart of accounts, reoccurring transactions, products and services, the other big one, product categories, custom fields, payment methods, terms, attachments, and tags. So we might look at some of those items a little more detail later. What else we have here? We've got the help menu with of course the H. That one's an easy to remember. Let's go back to the dashboard. Control-Alt-H gives us our help. Control-Alt-H, there it is. Now that one could be useful, but we also have this help button up top. So if you're in the normal view and you're not in a report, that one's pretty readily available. And then you've got the global search, which we took a look at. Focus on the left. This is the dialog box. Exit transaction. So these two will do similar things oftentimes. Control-Alt-X, Control-Alt-C. So if I'm in a transaction and I'm in an invoice, again, I can stay away from the keyboard because if I'm navigating the form, I can go tabbing through it with the tab button. If I want to X out, instead of going out here, I could say Control-Alt-X. And do you want to leave without saving? I'm going to say yes. And I could just enter yes. And I could go in here again and enter an invoice and do a similar control. What if I tab through here? Tab. And I say Control-Alt-C. That's going to clear it. So that might not save the transaction, right? That's going to, we mistakenly went in there. That's almost like an undo, I believe, right? You can kind of undo or clear rather than Xing out. So this is exiting out, which is going to ask you if you want to record it. Whereas if you cancel out, you're saying, I didn't mean to go here. Undo, kind of get me out of here without. And then you got the save and new, save and close, save and send. So if we go into our forms here, like an invoice, those are typically the options down below where you have the drop down, save new, save close, save and share, or save and send. So instead of going down here and clicking this button, you can do it with a shortcut, save and new, save and close, save and send, and then you've got the good old print item. So those could be useful to kind of look into. What I would recommend doing is saying, where do I spend the most time in with the type of business that I'm in, and which of these shortcuts would be the most useful. The one shortcut that it's not like readily available, as easy just to get to, is this global search view, which gives you those recent transactions. So that one is one that I would definitely, think about and put into your practice if you need to look at those. Most of the other ones, like I say, I think are pretty readily available because of the well-designed web page format by using the mouse. But you might be able to get there a little bit faster, reduce a little bit of clicking time, and be impressive and whatnot by using some of these shortcuts so you can check those out.